In our headlines at this hour, North Korea reportedly test-fired a round of artillery shots into the sea this past Sunday morning in a fresh display of defiance despite regional calls for dialogue. And Foreign Minister Park Jin is over in the U.S. this week to address regional security amid speculation of an impending nuclear test by North Korea. Meanwhile, consumer prices in South Korea continue to surge while its growth outlook dims. The OECD says inflation may hit 4.8% while growth will hover at 2.7%. Hope your work week is off to a good start. You're watching the Daily Report for Monday afternoon, June 13th here in South Korea. I'm Min Sun-hee. North Korea this past Sunday morning is reported to have engaged in a fresh round of artillery testing, which officials here have condemned. Kim Hyo-sun starts us off.
North Korea fired multiple suspected artillery shots into the sea on Sunday, just days after the regime's leader called for greater defense capability to cope with outside threats. South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff said in a statement that it detected several flight trajectories believed to be North Korean artillery on Sunday morning. It further added that Seoul maintains a firm military readiness stance in close coordination with the U.S. but provided no additional details, including the exact number of shots or the origin of the firing. Following the launch, South Korea convened a National Security Council meeting where officials expressed concern over the North's upgrading of weapons system. They also reaffirmed they would respond to such efforts by North Korea in a stern manner. While Pyongyang's artillery tests draw less outside attention than its missile launches, the regime's forward-deployed long-range artillery guns are a serious security threat to South Korea's populous metropolitan region, which is only 40 to 50 kilometers away from the border with the North. Against this backdrop, new South Korean ambassador to the U.S., Cho Tae-yong, underscored the importance of Seoul-Washington coordination in dealing with the North. Speaking to reporters on Sunday, he explained the two countries need to strengthen their alliance based on Washington's extended deterrence. Cho also expressed regret over the North's continued emphasis on, quote, power for power policies. Kim Hyo-sun, Arirang News.
And Foreign Minister Park Jin has reaffirmed the prospect of a nuclear test by North Korea in the near future, while reiterating a stern response to such blatant provocation from both Seoul and Washington. Our Kim Dami reports.
South Korea and the U.S. will boost their deterrence in order to prevent North Korea from staging provocations and will respond firmly if the regime decides to do so. That's according to Park Jin speaking to reporters after paying tribute at the Korean War Memorial in Washington on Sunday. He added he will hold talks with U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken on Monday over his hard Washington cooperation to stop and counter threats from Pyongyang. While pointing out that the North is ready to conduct a nuclear test at any time, Park once again urged the regime to return to dialogue and diplomacy. Seoul's top diplomat then stressed the South has many incentives to offer if Pyongyang takes the path of denuclearization. The South Korean foreign minister will sit down for talks with his American counterpart for the first time on Monday. From North Korea's nuclear issues to extended deterrence, other agenda items are expected to include South Korea-U.S. cooperation in the economic security sector, the Ukraine crisis, and peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific region. During his 4-day trip, Park also plans to meet with U.S. congressional leaders and experts at think tanks. Park further voiced hope of holding a second summit between the leaders of South Korea and the U.S. in the United States at a time that suits both sides. Regarding a South Korea-Japan summit, he said there will be suitable opportunity, as the Japanese Prime Minister said he would like to meet the South Korean president in the near future. Kim Dami, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, the head of the World Trade Organization is urging unity among members of the globe to tackle what she has referred to as a polycrisis. Speaking ahead of the WTO's 12th Ministerial Conference on Sunday, Director General Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala claimed the world faces a host of challenges, including the pandemic, the war in Ukraine, soaring food and energy prices. Adding that no one country can tackle these challenges alone, she called for a united global effort while warning that the road ahead to reaching a consensus would be tough. The 4-day meeting in Geneva will address COVID-19 vaccines, fishing subsidies, food security and WTO reform. Over in the U.S., prices at the pumps there have hit a record high, according to the Oil Price Information Service this past weekend. The national average price of gasoline topped $5 a gallon for the first time. It has reportedly broken the previous record set in July 2008 during the global financial crisis. Prices have been rising steadily for the last 8 weeks and are up from around $3 just a year ago. Analysts say this is due to rising demand as the economy recovers from the pandemic and the shortfall in oil supplies due to Russia's war against Ukraine. And it's also looking to be a losing battle at gas stations here in the country as prices hit levels unseen in a decade. Our Jung has more on this, as well as the latest economic prospects for South Korea by the OECD.
Amid soaring global oil prices, fuel costs in South Korea have trended higher as well for a fifth week in a row, hitting record highs. According to the oil price website Opinet run by the Korea National Oil Corporation, the average price of gasoline sold at local pumps on Sunday was roughly 2,069 won per liter. That's about $1.60, depending on the exchange rate, breaking a 10-year high. Diesel, too, has risen to an all-time high at around 2,068 won. With fuel prices soaring, more people are choosing to take public transport and leave their cars at home.
Because the fuel prices are too high, I tell my kids to take the subway instead of going to pick them up from school.
And it's not just fuel costs. The prices of other goods in South Korea are skyrocketing as well. The country's consumer price index last month spiked by 5.4% from a year ago, the steepest rise since 2008 during the global financial crisis. And that looks likely to continue for a while, according to major economic organizations. The OECD, in its latest report, has raised its inflation outlook for South Korea this year to a 24-year high. The OECD raised it to 4.8% from its December estimate of 2.1%, citing the surge in fuel costs and the war in Ukraine. It's the steepest on-year rise since 1998 in the aftermath of the Asian financial crisis, when the country's inflation jumped to 7.5%. The organization also slashed its economic growth forecast for South Korea to 2.7% from its earlier projection of 3%.
Amid the accelerating inflationary pressure, the economic slowdown is worsening, and thus we have stagflation. Although interest rates will no doubt be raised to rein in consumer prices, this has limitations.
The government plans to revise the country's GDP growth forecast for this year in the coming days, along with an announcement of new economic policies. 엄지영, Arirang News.
Staying on the local front, the truckers' strike has entered its 7th day. According to the Korean Confederation of Trade Unions on this Monday, talks with the Transport Ministry that lasted over 8 hours this past weekend failed to bridge the gap over differences. Truckers are demanding an extension of the freight rate system that guarantees them basic wages. The strike has put cargo deliveries on hold, delaying shipments of cars, steel and cement. Come Wednesday, South Korea will launch its second attempt aimed at placing a satellite into orbit using homegrown technology. Now, while we count down to that event, our Kim Do-yeon in this following report walks us through the birth of our own space launch vehicle. Do take a look.
Just 2 days to go until the South Korean space rocket Nuri takes off for the second time. It was in March of 2010 that the government decided to develop the country's own rocket with no outside help. Specifically, the goal was to secure the development know-how to build a launch vehicle that can carry a 1.5-ton application satellite into low orbit. 6 years later, in early May 2016, the key to this project, the 75-ton engine, underwent its first test. It burned for 1.5 short seconds. By the end of May, burn time had increased to 30 seconds. 200 tests have been done since, with the goal of achieving at least 145 seconds. 2 years later, the engine reached its potential on the ground, and so it was time to launch a test vehicle. In this test, the single engine burned for 151 seconds, which was 11 seconds longer than the goal that day of 140 seconds.
Through today's test launch, we have confirmed that preparations for the development of Nuri are on course. The core technology and the hardest part of the project to develop, the 75-ton engine, was tested today.
This made South Korea only the 7th country in the world to have its own liquid-fueled medium to large-size engine. But sending Nuri into space for the first time would take a total of 5 of these engines. When it lifted off in October 2021, the nation was transfixed. But in this first test, it fell a bit short. The 7-ton engine in the third stage stopped burning around 40 seconds too soon, which meant the dummy satellite did not reach the intended orbit. But just before the launch, a scientist had told me this was just the beginning.
Even if we don't succeed this time around, we will be gaining a lot of new technology. We can analyze the aspects where we succeeded and the ones where we didn't and improve on them to make the second one a success.
The second launch was already scheduled at that point for mid-2022, so scientists analyzed the problems and worked hard to fix them. And on June 9th, with fingers crossed, the third stage was attached to the rocket. Now, the second launch is scheduled for June 15th, this time with the rocket carrying some actual working satellites. We'll know whether it was a success or not about an hour and 45 minutes after liftoff. 김도현, Arirang News.
And those are the headlines for the first half of the Daily Report. In the second half, we have a panel of pundits weighing in on the recently held Security Summit over in Singapore. Stay with us.
Share South Korea's experience in tackling COVID-19 and introduce a Korean new Korean survivor of Japan's wartime sex slavery met with
extraordinary climate crisis and pledged to work with the EU to tackle the challenge.
The objective of its North Korea policy is
protesters gathering across the country to peacefully demand an end to hate and violence.
Arirang, what matters?
Feel so good right now. Maybe I had a drink or two, but this somehow feels like it's forever. All my friends are here having fun and feeling good right now. Maybe this is forever. All my friends are here having fun and feeling good right now. Forever.
Welcome back. The Shangri-La dialogue came to an end this past Sunday with defense officials from the Indo-Pacific acknowledging that is, the current challenges to regional security amid North Korea's persistent provocations and tensions between China and the U.S. For more, I have Professor Kim Young-jun from the Korea National Defense University. Professor Kim, welcome back.
Thank you.
I also have Professor Terence Rurik at the U.S. Naval War College live on the line. Professor Rurik, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
Right. Professor, we'll start with you then. Before we delve into the security summit, could we start with a few words from you with regard to North Korea's latest display of defiance this past Sunday, that is, when they fired multiple artillery shots between 8 in the morning and 11 in the morning? What do you suppose is the intention behind these persistent acts of provocation, Professor Rurik?
Sure. And I think in this particular case, it's an important reminder that the security concerns from North Korea are more than just nuclear and ballistic missile capabilities, that the artillery capabilities that can reach Seoul, those are serious concerns and need to also be remembered. As far as intention, it's difficult to know entirely, but I think that there are a number of things that could be possible explanations, and they don't necessarily need to be mutually exclusive either. I think in many respects, until we know exactly what was tested and such, it could very well be simply a technical test to test new capabilities, capabilities that may be modernized, things like rate of fire, other sorts of elements to their artillery capabilities. It also can have an important political impact domestically for North Korea's population to show strength internally, as well as external elements as well. But I think sometimes we jump quickly to the belief that this is an attempt to try to get the U.S. and South Korea's attention. I'm not sure that's the case in this particular instance. I think it may be more about testing capabilities and demonstrating those capabilities.
Right, and against that backdrop of North Korea testing its capabilities, Professor Kim, what do you believe then were some of the highlights of this year's Regional Security Summit over in Singapore?
Yes, Shangri-La dialogue is the right time and the right place. First of all, after the presidential election, a new defense minister, Lee Jong-suk, of the new ROK administration, firstly attend this kind of multilateral regional forum. And this is a very good opportunity to introduce a direction of a foreign and security defense policy of the new ROK administration to the international community, including the ROK-US alliance and security cooperation between the ROK, the U.S. and Japan, and also a policy toward North Korea. Secondly, this is a multilateral dialogue, including the U.S. and China, and the two countries have made their own agenda and argument for diverse and sensitive issues like Taiwan and others. So because of the U.S. and China strategic competition, international media focused Shangri-La dialogue this year. Moreover, this dialogue was the first meeting after the Russia-Ukraine war. So influence of and impact of this war naturally became a topic of this dialogue.
Right, and staying with the same question, Professor Rurik, what are your thoughts with regard to some of the highlights at the latest Shangri-La dialogue?
Sure, and I just want to second the issue of Ukraine being a very big shadow cast throughout many of the different presentations and discussions as a piece. I thought that it was also important to see how much was being done in the sideline discussions as well. I think that is a very important and underappreciated element of these meetings and a crucial piece to that. I thought it was interesting that China and the United States laid out their very clear and expected positions in regards to Taiwan, but a question was raised in regards to how long China might be willing to wait in regards to the status quo, which at least for the moment is the positions that is tolerable to all sides. And there was not a clear answer for that. Lastly, I'll just add that I thought it was also interesting the comments made by the Indonesian defense minister, that it points to how oftentimes the focus falls on the bigger powers in the region Indonesia reminded us that there are a number of other states that are not the big powers, that have different perspectives, different positions on how these things fall out and how they have to try to navigate these difficulties between major powers.
Right, that is a valid point, Professor Rarick, and thank you for shedding some light on that. We're giving us a perspective on that, of course. In the meantime, Professor Kim, Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida shared a rather sobering speech about the state of global security, claiming that Ukraine today may be East Asia tomorrow. How do you respond to these words?
Yeah, Japanese Prime Minister Kishida made very the emotional speech, also important speech. He emphasized that cooperation, harmony rather than tension and physical conflict in this region naturally, and is a common anxiety about this region today. The U.S. and China has been a great rivalry in this region, and its competition and possible conflict will be possible in the future. Thus, in a multilateral dialogue, his point was natural. But at the same time, Japanese position is more cooperation with the U.S. and in the Pacific country against the rise of China. Thus, a dual meaning. In his speech, if somebody asks who will be in Russia in East Asia, the answer will be naturally there will be China. Thus, in this context, his point was not just about importance of peace in this region, but also at the same time a warning against the rise of China and also North Korean threat as well.
Professor Rarick, staying with Mr. Kishida's keynote speech, some pundits claim his emphasis on the threat of nuclear weapons was more striking than his warning about possible regional conflict in East Asia. What are your thoughts?
It was interesting, the level of considerable detail that he went to in regards to nuclear concerns and Japan's position in regards to nuclear weapons, how he did not see a contradiction in Japan's positions for reliance on the U.S. nuclear extended deterrence guarantee, but also Japan's call for a world without nuclear weapons. But I think his comments also raise one of the fundamental questions that is part of the discussion of the longer-term impact of Ukraine, and that is looking at Russia's nuclear threats and trying to decide what lessons are other states learning from Russia's statements in that regard. And does it raise concerns and perhaps increase perceptions among some states that nuclear weapons may in fact have more utility than perhaps was believed? And also certainly what lessons might North Korea be gaining from this? And I think there is a potential debate for that. But again, those are the central question. That's the central question that I think Kishida was raising here is what role will nuclear weapons play going forward in international diplomacy?
Right. And staying with what Professor Rarick has just said, Professor Kim, North Korea's Kim Jong-un has vowed that he would use power for power against threats to his country's sovereignty. Now, what do these words tell you about the prospects of denuclearization here in the Korean Peninsula?
Yeah, Kim Jong-un mentioned again power for power speech. And due to a tension between the U.S. and China and the U.S. and Russia, North Korea already recognized that China and Russia will not join any kinds of U.S.-led UN sanction. So sanction will be not effect on the North Korean behavior. And Kim Jong-un knows that the new administration will strengthen a partnership with the U.S., Japan, and the Pacific country. So he wants on strengthen ROC-U.S. combined exercise and security cooperation between the U.S., the ROC, and Japan, and powerful power justify North Korean nuclear missile development as well as a partnership between the China and North Korea. That's why powerful power speech is important for North Korea to be understand in this context.
Right. And Professor Rarick, going back to what you said, now given the status quo that Russia's invasion of Ukraine could actually get countries to think about boosting their own arsenal, what do you suppose would be a feasible way of addressing nuclear tensions here in this part of the world? Should we demand a complete surrender of all existing weapons by North Korea? Or should we simply seek a verifiable halt, that is, in the development of new weapons? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that for a some time now, it has been fairly clear that North Korea is not going to denuclearize under most circumstances. More pressure, more engagement is unlikely to change North Korea's position. And so I think while the goal of denuclearization still needs to be maintained for some important political and non-proliferation goals, I think increasingly the position of the U.S. and South Korea has to begin to shift towards strengthening deterrence, as it already is doing, the importance of the alliance, because again, I think that denuclearization is going to be difficult. And we also have to start looking at North Korea as perhaps more of an arms control problem. Not that that's easy. That is going to be exceedingly difficult as well. But if there is some possibility to gain something of along the lines of a testing moratorium to codify that, I think that would be an important step forward. But I think denuclearization is going to be a very, very difficult goal to achieve, and we have to shift in another direction.
Right. And moving forward, Professor Kim, over in Singapore this past weekend, U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin drew attention to an alarming rise in the number of unsafe and unprofessional encounters between Chinese aircraft and sea vessels with those of other countries. How do you interpret such hostile encounters?
Yeah, recently Chinese naval ship, or Blue Man, we call, intervened in the South China and East China Sea. Also, China and Russia intervened on air zone of South Korea, and two countries have strengthened its combined military exercise. Chinese expansion with the artificial line and Blue Man in this region, especially in South and East China Sea, is already famous. So I think it's a Lloyd's speech is that warns China for its aggressive expansion of military and behavior in this region against peace in the region.
And Professor Arirang, addressing the Shangri-La dialogue virtually, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky conveyed a very carefully crafted response to a question about Taiwan's potential fate by claiming that diplomacy and punitive sanctions only serve as preemptive efforts to stop wars and that they serve little purpose once war begins. Do you agree?
I think he made an important point there, and sanctions are a difficult issue writ large in that their record of success in changing state behavior is not terribly impressive. At the start of any particular crisis, the threat of sanctions or possible some partial imposition of sanctions while holding back others in reserve could have some deterrent effect. But once a state commits to using force, it is unlikely that sanctions are going to have significant cost to be able to offset what the state has already made as a commitment to its willingness to use force to address some particular issue. So I think sanctions certainly send an important message, and I think in many respects here, it is about deterring as well future actions, demonstrating the unity behind a number of members in the international community to pose these kinds of potential costs for a future action in Russia's case or perhaps in the Asia Pacific. But again, I think that once the conflict has begun, sanctions are more difficult to actually change state behavior.
Right. Now, we have time for just one more very brief question to you, Professor Kim. Defense Minister Lee Jong-sop and his Singaporean counterparts signed an upgraded defense agreement on the sidelines of the Security Summit. And generally speaking, Professor Kim, how do you assess the Union administration's efforts to boost collaboration with its regional partners?
Yeah, the UN administration pursues strengthen a partnership within the Pacific country and the U.S. and Japan. Singapore is one of the important partners, definitely. The UN administration shares concern about aggressiveness of North Korea and China with the U.S. and partner in the Pacific region. Yoon decided to join NATO conference, and he wants to be a member of the Indo-Pacific and NATO country in saving liberal institutionalism world order with the U.S. against the revisionist countries like China and Russia. And another thing is the defense industry is another important factor in focusing defense diplomacy in this region like Singapore.
Right. Professor Kim, as always, thank you very much for your insights on that. And Professor Arirang, over in the US, thank you very much for joining us live.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
The broad lifting of most COVID-19 related restrictions appears to have boosted credit card spending on travel and hospitality. Our Arirang has the figures.
It seems more people are now returning to pre-COVID-19 normal life, evidence of which can be seen with an increase in travel demand. Here at Seoul Station, travelers are carrying luggage, with some looking excited about their trips.
I just arrived here from Busan. Only window seats were available up to several months ago. But now train seats are fully booked, even on weekdays.
I visited Jeju Island a few weeks ago and the flight was fully booked.
Total card use for payments rose 11% on year in April, of which public transport spending increased almost 70%. This is largely driven by the lifting of COVID-19 measures.
According to data released by South Korea's Credit Finance Association, card spending for public transport stood at 1.08 trillion Korean won, or around $1.4 billion in April. On top of that, spending on business facility management and business support services, which includes travel agencies, rose 40.4% to over $252 million. Lifting social distancing has also contributed to high card spending for accommodation in restaurants and businesses related to leisure activities. Accommodation and restaurant spending jumped almost 23% on year to $9.1 billion. The figure for leisure businesses rose 22% to over $1.1 billion. According to one credit card company, the number of approved card settlements at duty-free shops has also seen a rise. The company reported that card spending for flight tickets and at duty-free shops increased 19% compared to the same period last year. Overseas spending also jumped 17%. And the head of the Korean Credit Card Academic Society predicts even more travel-related spending ahead.
With travel restrictions eased, demand for overseas travel is seeing a rapid rise. Card spending in travel-related sectors is expected to peak from June to July during the summer vacation period.
He added that as COVID-19 becomes endemic, total card spending is likely to continue to increase this year. Lee Hyun, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, prices of fruits and vegetables are soaring amid poor yield as local farms continue to face dry spells. Our Song Yoo-jin has more on this grim reality.
These days, it's easy to spot South Korean government officials standing in front of the news cameras giving worrying updates about food prices.
Because watermelons are so expensive these days, I think I need to buy one today before the price goes up.
The wholesale price of one watermelon has risen about 6,000 Korean won, which is around $4.7 from last year. Then how about other groceries? Although the country saw some much-needed rain across the country recently, there are some areas still experiencing drought. This has led to a surge in vegetable prices. Compared to last year, the price of most vegetables has increased. The price of white radish jumped 56%, green chili 36%, and garlic 63%. Green onion is up 86%, sesame leaf 28%, and potato 55%. South Korea's average accumulated precipitation in the past month was only 6% of what it was last year. Reservoirs and rivers have dried up due to the drought, leaving riverbeds dusty and cracked. Without water for greenhouses, vegetables inside have become hard as nails.
Through my 85 years of life, I've never seen such an extreme drought. There hasn't been any rain or snow from winter.
The drought, which started in the winter, is also hampering operations at factories. This is one of the biggest petrochemical complexes in South Korea, located in Chungcheongnam-do province. It's currently on high alert over the need to secure industrial water. Factories owned by Hyundai Oil Bank, Lotte Chemical, and LG Chem in this complex are searching for alternatives as the water reserve rates of a nearby lake, its main source of industrial water, fell to some 30%. Normally, when the water reserve rate drops to 20%, the remaining water is set aside for agricultural use. This means factories will have to look elsewhere for water to keep operations going. 송유진, Arirang News.
In this week's feature segment, we explore the continued interest in English language proficiency here on the local front that appears to begin from the cradle to the cubicle, if you will. My colleague Choi Min-jung has the story.
It's 11 a.m. on a weekday, and there are around 80 students studying in this classroom at an English language academy. They're here regardless of age or profession, with a single goal in mind: a high TOEIC score. The test of English for International Communication, also more widely known as TOEIC, is an international standardized test of English skill for non-native speakers. In South Korea, TOEIC test scores have become increasingly more necessary for those wishing to make themselves a strong candidate to enter universities, find jobs, or get promotions. According to data from the Korea TOEIC Committee, the country's average TOEIC test scores have been increasing annually for the past couple of years. In 2021, the average score Koreans got was 684 out of 990, up by 51 points compared to a decade ago. The bar is much higher for people who want to get into South Korea's top companies, as the average TOEIC score for new employees was above 850 last year.
I have to have a TOEIC score to get a job, so I'm taking this class to achieve my target score. I don't need a really high score because I'm studying in the field of science, but I'm aiming for 970.
Like this job seeker, almost half of test takers last year took the TOEIC test to get a job. There were many others who took the test for certification after graduation, as well as for further educational purposes. 7% took the test to get promoted at work.
For college students, of course, for graduation, they need this score in order to graduate. And other students, they want to transfer to a university, a better university. In the age of 30 to 35, they are studying for promotion because if they get the score, they get extra points for the promotion. Yeah.
English has long been the most common second language in the world. Let's take a look at how the language is taught and learned here in South Korea. English in Korea is taught at a rather young age. Many parents tend to invest a lot of money and time on their children so they can attend English kindergartens. And some also hire English tutors to help their children pass the level test needed to go to such facilities. However, there are other educational institutions like LSY Education Institution for Gifted Children that offer English education that focus on language acquisition without a competitive element. Teachers here say that they try to make an environment where students can be exposed to and sample different types of authentic English.
For you, what was difficult?
I found that it was hard to make 45-degree wedges because if I take 45-degree wedges a few minutes later...
Yeah, I see them getting more confidence. Because sometimes in the beginning they're very shy, but like a muscle, but they need time to open up. But with the right language to help them do that, they can actually gain confidence. Even with this science class, sometimes the point is not actually succeeding, it's actually gaining confidence. And the same goes for language, I think.
Younger children who are 5 to 6 years old also get the chance to learn English, but through a mixture of their mother tongue, Korean.
I've seen some younger kids develop tics like blinking or coughing when they are forced into an environment where they don't understand the language. I used to work at an English kindergarten, and it was sad to see that this was the case. Here, we try to help kids develop confidence first in their mother tongue and then combine English in conversations when they are ready.
One parent says she believes learning a second language like English is necessary for her child's future.
A lot of mothers want the best for their children's future, and I want them to live a free life. However, we can't achieve that without taking challenges and experiencing failure. In order to take on challenges in life and dream big, I think acquiring a second language is critical.
We teach English, but we only provide education to children who are comfortable with their mother tongue. Our teaching is based on using the 5 senses. It's not based on memorizing, but focused on making children understand the language through actions.
Aside from academically oriented places of learning, English kids cafes, where children can get experience with English outside of classrooms, are also gaining popularity.
We're not the same as English kindergartens or cram schools. Our curriculum is based on playing, so children spend time reading books, playing board games, and generally having fun with native speakers.
So back in our time, it was either you play or either you do the books. But here we try to put it together. We want them to enjoy, have a good time. For instance, a kid can remember all the dinosaur names because he likes it, and that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to spark that interest, that love for the books.
English education begins to get more intense once children enter elementary school. Studying English is mandatory for students in South Korea beginning in the 3rd grade. 3rd and 4th graders are required to have 136 hours of English classes per school year, and that increases to 204 hours once they reach 5th and 6th grade. Middle and high schoolers have to invest even more time on English in order to take the National College Entrance Exam, the 수능. Naturally, students are more exposed to textbook English.
공부할 때 가장 어려웠던 점은 어떤 게 있었어요?
제가 외운 단어는 이 뜻이 아닌데 그냥 제가 아는 뜻으로 해석을 하려고 그러면 지문에서 잘 해석이 안 되고 적용하는 게 잘 어려울 때가 많은 것 같아요. 하나하나의 뜻은 잘 알겠는데 이제 그걸 조합을 할 때 어떤 의미로 해석을 해야 할지 이건 좀 어려운 것 같아요.
I'm looking at these kids. I'm very impressed by the English skills. I'm very impressed by the high vocabulary that's instilled within them. But I do oftentimes think about perhaps the practicality of emphasizing such grammar and vocab skills.
So how hard is the 수능? We asked a number of native speakers to solve some questions.
Do you have your answers?
Not yet. It's pretty complicated. I think it's either 4 or 5.
What about you, Steve?
I'm still reading it. Yeah, it's 5.
Oh, I better go 5 as well then.
Yeah, the correct answer is number 5. So you guys did get it correct.
That's good.
Yeah,
It's good
took
to
you
know.
some time though, right?
Yeah, right.
What did you think of it?
I think it's difficult. It's obviously difficult even for intelligent guys like us.
I suppose for Koreans, this is heavy stuff.
Would you try answering that question?
Let me have a look. Zooming in. Maybe it's number 2.
Number 2?
Yeah.
The correct answer is number 5.
Whoa.
Pretty tricky, huh?
Oh yeah. Sure. It's very subtle.
모르겠는데 5번? 찍어야 될 것 같은데.
찍으신 거예요? 답이 5번이라서.
아 맞아요? 아 너무 어려운데? 너무 어려워요. 이거 근데 아이들이 이거를 다 내용을 이해하고 하나요?
I will go for number 3.
The correct answer is actually number 5.
Number 5, fantastic. So I'm wrong. Quite challenging. And what grade are we giving this to? Like, how old are the kids?
High school seniors.
Wow. As I say, you know, the competition in the Korea is extremely high, and the pressure for the kids is really, really high too. So I don't really blame anything. It's basically the competition. So totally right. You know, the kids got to study a lot. So.
Stephen Krashen, the most frequently cited scholar in the field of language education, says that people do not acquire language by speaking or writing or by studying the rules of grammar.
That we acquire language in one way and only one way. All human beings do it the same. When we understand it. Language acquisition doesn't come from speaking. Being able to speak the language is the result of language acquisition. We don't acquire language by studying it. It's acquired by what we call comprehensible input, listening and reading. And believe it or not, that's the only way it happens. While it's happening, you don't know it's happening.
Krashen also stresses that reading for pleasure, especially fiction, gives people not only conversational language, but also helps them perform better in standardized tests.
Want to get better on these standardized tests? Go to Starbucks, bring a couple of novels, sit back, relax, and read, and you'll do absolutely fine. All the studies show you do very well on these tests if you do lots of pleasure reading, not just the TOEIC, but the TOEFL, all those things.
The hard truth is that standardized tests are still required in today's society. However, people must remember that learning a language is not just about achieving high scores. As experts say, acquiring a second language, that be English, Chinese, or German, is not just about the grammar or correcting errors. What's important is being able to listen and read as preparation to speak without anxiety. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. A bipartisan group of U.S. senators have agreed on a framework for potential gun safety legislation. The framework includes support for tougher background checks for buyers under the age of 21 and a crackdown on illegal gun purchases. It has the support of 10 Republicans, which is enough for the bill to pass through the Senate. U.S. President Joe Biden has called the measures, quote, steps in the right direction, but added that they still fall short and don't include a ban on the sale of assault rifles. The senators have also called for convictions for domestic violence and restraining orders to be added to the national background check databases. In India, security forces have demolished the homes of several Muslim figures accused of rioting, which followed derogatory remarks made by two ruling Hindu nationalist party figures about the Prophet Muhammad. The homes were destroyed on Sunday in the country's northern Uttar Pradesh state after protests erupted across India on Friday. According to authorities, residents of the homes were told to evacuate beforehand, whilst up to 300 people connected to the riots were arrested. Meanwhile, in the state of West Bengal, an emergency law prohibiting public gatherings has been put in place until June 16th, alongside a 48-hour internet service suspension following another rally. Mexican immigration authorities have disbanded a migrant caravan of more than 7,000 people heading for the U.S. border. Officials on Saturday said the caravan was dissolved after reaching an agreement with its organizers. They redirected the migrants to Mexico's National Institute for Migration in Chiapas state. The agency says it's also assisting people in obtaining paperwork to regularize their stay in Mexico. The migrant caravan, made up of people from across Central America, Venezuela, Haiti, and other places, is said to be one of the region's largest caravans in recent years. It had departed from the southern border city of Tapachula last Monday to coincide with the Summit of Americas. Pope Francis has apologized to the people of Democratic Republic of Congo and South Sudan for having to cancel his visit because of walking problems. The apology was made on Sunday after the Vatican officially announced on Thursday the indefinite postponement of the July 2nd to July 7th trip. The head of the Catholic Church has been suffering knee problems for over a month, forcing him to use a wheelchair. The 85-year-old also suffers from sciatica, a sharp pain along the nerves of the leg. Sources say he has been receiving several injections a week, as well as physical therapy. The Pope is still scheduled to visit Canada from July 24th to July 30th. Russia's own version of McDonald's, roughly translated to tasty and that's it, has officially opened after the exit of U.S. fast food chain from the country last month. Opening on Sunday, dozens of Russians waited in line at the same location in the capital where McDonald's initially opened its doors 30 years ago. A total of 15 new facilities opened on the day at sites previously used by McDonald's. Businessman Oleg Paroyev bought the restaurants following McDonald's decisions to withdraw from Russia over the Ukraine war. According to Paroyev, 200 more locations are expected to open nationwide by the end of June and a total of 850 by the end of summer. Matthew Ashley, Arirang News.
Good Monday afternoon. Some of you experienced heavy downpours this morning, and we're seeing some more rain, expecting to 5 to 40 millimeters in and around Seoul metropolitan area, while portions of Gyeonggi-do province will see up to 60 millimeters. Well, it could get blustery, so please be careful if you're out and about. Well, aside from heavy downpours, we also have some rain in the forecast starting from Jeju up to 40 millimeters. And that's going to expand to southern regions. And meanwhile, mountainous areas of Gangwon-do province will also see up to 40 millimeters. So don't forget to bring your umbrella if you live there. Well, overall, the air quality will be good throughout the day and it's cooler than yesterday, Seoul reaching 28 degrees. And that is 4 degrees lower than yesterday. While eastern regions remain relatively cooler due to an easterly wind. And the rain will continue until Wednesday in some regions with some squally wind as strong as 15 meters per second on the south coast and Jeju. So please be careful of damage from flying objects and stay safe. Now let's take a look at the worldwide weather conditions.
That brings us to the end of Monday's edition of the Daily Report. We'll be back same time tomorrow. Do join us then. Thank you for now.